There is a rule that has quietly separated the wealthy from the struggling for over 3,000 years. It involves the number 7. And when I tell you exactly how it works step by step, you are going to realize that almost everything you have ever heard about this rule is incomplete, distorted, or just plain wrong. Most people who talk about the 777 rule give you the surface version. They tell you the 3 sevens. They give you a quick explanation. And they send you on your way. But they never show you how to actually practice it. They never walk you through the real steps. And because of that gap, millions of people try this rule, fail to see results, and then blame themselves. Today I am going to fix that. Today I am going to show you exactly how to practice the 777 rule correctly, step by step, the way it was always meant to be practiced. And by the end of this, you will understand why most people get it wrong and how you are going to get it right. Let me ask you something honest before we go any further. Have you ever tried to apply a financial principle and felt like it just was not working for you? You followed the steps someone described. You made the effort. You committed to it for a few weeks. And then nothing changed. Maybe things even got worse. And you started to wonder whether these ancient principles were real, or whether they were just nice stories that sounded good, but did not actually work in the real world. If that has been your experience, I need you to hear me clearly. The principle was not broken. The application was. There is a massive difference between knowing about a rule and knowing how to practice it. And that difference is exactly what this video is about. I want to tell you about a man I met several years ago at a financial workshop. I was facilitating in a community center in our city. His name was Marcus. Marcus was 44 years old, worked in logistics management, earned a decent salary, and by every outside measure, looked like a man who had his life together. But Marcus pulled me aside during the break and told me something that has stayed with me ever since. He said he had been trying to practice the 777 rule for almost 2 years. He had read about it, watched videos about it, even printed out a little card with the 3 sevens on it, and taped it to his bathroom mirror. And he said to me with real pain in his eyes, "It is not working. I feel like I am doing everything right and nothing is changing." I asked him to walk me through exactly what he was doing, and within 5 minutes I understood the problem completely. Marcus knew the rule, but he had never been taught the practice. He was doing all 3 sevens in the wrong order, at the wrong time, with the wrong intention, and without the foundational step that makes everything else work. By the time we finished our conversation that evening, Marcus had a completely different understanding, and 6 months later he called me to say that more had shifted in those 6 months than in the previous 2 years combined. The difference was not the rule. The difference was understanding how to actually do it. So before I walk you through each step, I need to explain something important about why this rule exists in the first place. Because if you do not understand the why, the how will never fully make sense. The 777 rule is rooted in one of the oldest and most tested understandings of how wealth moves through the world. Jewish sages, Torah scholars, and generations of families who survived persecution, exile, poverty, and economic collapse did not preserve this wisdom because it sounded beautiful. They preserved it because it worked. It worked in Egypt. It worked in Babylon. It worked in Europe during centuries of hardship. And it works today because the principles underneath it are not about money in the way we usually think about money. They are about rhythm. They are about cycles. They are about understanding that the universe itself operates on a pattern of effort and release, of accumulation and circulation, of work and rest. When your financial life aligns with that rhythm, things begin to flow. When it does not, No matter how hard you work, you will always feel like you are pushing against a current that is stronger than you. The 777 rule has 3 parts. The first 7 is about rest. The second 7 is about release. The third 7 is about giving. Most people know those 3 words, but here is what most people do not know. Those 3 parts must be practiced in a specific sequence, with specific actions, at specific intervals. And there is a foundational step that comes before all 3 of them that almost nobody talks about. That foundational step is awareness. You cannot rest what you have not examined. You cannot release what you have not identified. You cannot give from a place of true intention if you do not know what you actually have. So the very first thing you must do before you attempt any part of this rule is what I call the full financial inventory, and I am going to tell you exactly how to do it. There was a woman in my neighborhood named Sophia. Sophia was a schoolteacher, single mother of 2 children, and she had been living paycheck to paycheck for almost 8 years. She had tried budgeting apps, savings challenges, and every piece of financial advice the internet had to offer. Nothing stuck. When I first spoke with her about the 777 rule, she said she had already heard of it and already tried it. I asked her the same question I asked Marcus. Walk me through exactly what you do. And Sophia described something that was genuinely intentioned but fundamentally incomplete. She was setting aside money on certain days. She was trying to rest on Sundays, and she was giving small amounts to her church. But she had never once sat down and looked at the full picture of her financial life. She did not know exactly how much came in each month. She did not know exactly how much went out or where it went. She had a general feeling about both, but not real numbers. And here is the truth that changed everything for Sophia. You cannot navigate without a map. The full financial inventory is your map, and without it, you are practicing the 777 rule blind. So here is how you do the foundational step. You sit down with a piece of paper or an open document on your phone or computer. You write down every single source of income you have, every one from your main job, any side work, any passive income, any irregular money that comes in. Write down the real numbers, not the gross salary on your contract, the real money that lands in your account. Then on another section of that same page, you write down every single thing that takes money from you, every bill, every subscription, every automatic charge, every debt payment, every habit, every coffee, every lunch, every small purchase that you make regularly. This is not an exercise in shame. This is an exercise in clarity. Because once Sophia did this for the first time in her life, she discovered 3 subscription services she had completely forgotten about. She discovered that her small daily purchases were adding up to almost $200 a month. She had never consciously accounted for. And she discovered that her actual deficit each month was not as large as it felt. It felt enormous. But when she saw the real number, she realized it was manageable. Clarity is the foundation of everything that follows. Do not skip this step. Do your inventory this week before you practice anything else. Now let us talk about how to correctly practice the first 7, which is the cycle of rest. And I need you to understand something about rest that most people in our modern world have completely backwards. Rest is not a reward you receive after you have done enough work. Rest is a practice you commit to before you feel like you deserve it. This distinction is everything. My grandfather, a man who built a small textile business from almost nothing after arriving in this country, with barely the clothes on his back, used to say something that I thought was strange when I was a boy. He would say that the day he stopped working was the most productive day of his week. I used to think he was joking. He was not. What my grandfather understood, And what the Torah encodes in the commandment about the Sabbath is that rest is not passive. Real rest is an active practice that restores the clarity of mind, without which good financial decisions are impossible. In Exodus 20:9, it says, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. Now here is what most people miss when they read that verse. The commandment is not just to rest on the seventh day. The commandment is to work with full intention for the 6 days that precede it. The rest and the work are one commandment. They are inseparable. You cannot practice the first 7 correctly by just taking a day off. You have to practice it by bringing intentional, focused effort to your 6 days, and then bringing complete sacred rest to your 7th. So here is how you practice the first 7 correctly step by step. On the first day of your cycle, which you will decide and designate as your day 1, you begin with a brief review of your financial inventory. Not a long session, just 10 or 15 minutes where you look at where you are, remind yourself of your goals, and set your intention for the 6 days ahead. Then, for each of the 6 working days, you commit to one single financial action, not 10 things. One thing. On day 1, maybe you pack your lunch instead of buying it. On day 2, maybe you make one phone call to negotiate a bill. On day 3, maybe you transfer a small amount to savings. Small, consistent, intentional actions taken over 6 days create a momentum that large, occasional efforts never can. And then on day 7, your rest day, you do something that most people would never think of as a financial practice. You completely stop thinking about money problems. You rest. You spend time with people you love. You do something that restores your soul. You eat a good meal. You walk outside. You breathe. Because here is what happens in the mind during genuine rest. The subconscious continues to process everything you have been working on. And when you return on day 1 of your next cycle, you will find that you have clarity and ideas and solutions that were not available to you when you were grinding without pause. Marcus told me that this single change, bringing real rest into his week instead of just collapsing from exhaustion on Sundays, changed his decision-making within the first month. He started saying no to bad opportunities he would have previously said yes to simply because he was tired and not thinking clearly. He started noticing small financial opportunities he had been walking past for years. The rest did not cost him anything. It gave him everything. Now let us go deeper into the second 7, which is the cycle of release. And this is the part where most people who try the 777 rule make their biggest mistake. They hear the word release, and they think it means letting go of things they do not care about. Canceling the subscriptions they forgot they had. Getting rid of the obvious waste. And while that is part of it, the real practice of release goes much deeper. It requires you to look at the things you are holding on to emotionally and financially, things that cost you, not because they are worthless, but because they are no longer right for where you are going. In Deuteronomy chapter 15, verses 1 and 2, the Torah commands that at the end of every 7 years there shall be a release. Every creditor shall release what he has lent to his neighbor. This is the Shemitah cycle, and what most people do not understand is that the Shemitah was not just a legal mechanism. It was a spiritual diagnostic tool. It forced every person in ancient Israel to look honestly at their financial relationships every 7 years and ask a fundamental question. Is this still serving life? Is this debt, this deal, this commitment, this partnership still moving things forward? Or has it become an anchor? Because here is the financial truth that the Shemitah principle encodes. The things that drain you do not announce themselves. They creep in slowly. The business relationship that was profitable 3 years ago, but is now just familiar. the investment that made sense when you entered it, but that you are now holding on to because of pride or sunk cost. The debt that you have been making minimum payments on for so long that it has become part of your identity. You do not even question it anymore. You have accepted it as permanent. But it is not permanent. Nothing about your financial life has to be permanent. Here is how you practice the second 7 correctly. You do this every 7 months rather than waiting 7 years, because in our modern economic environment, 7 months is a reasonable cycle for a deep review. Every 7 months you sit down with your financial inventory and you go through every single item with one question. If I were starting fresh today, with everything I know now, would I choose this again? And here is the critical part that most people skip. You have to answer this question, not from a place of guilt or obligation, but from a place of genuine, honest assessment. Every commitment that gets a clear yes, you keep and you recommit to it with intention. Every commitment that gets a no, you begin the process of releasing. I say begin the process because release does not always happen overnight. Sometimes releasing a financial commitment takes time, negotiation, and careful planning. But the moment you make the decision to release, something shifts. You stop unconsciously pouring your energy into something that is not serving you, and you begin directing that energy toward what will. Sophia told me that her 7-month review was one of the most uncomfortable things she had ever done with her money. But she also told me it was the most honest. She released a financial arrangement she had with a family member that had been draining her for years without either of them acknowledging it. She let go of a savings plan she had set up that was actually not aligned with her real goals. She ended a commitment to a service she had been paying for out of guilt, and the combination of those releases freed up more money each month than she had made in savings through years of careful budgeting. Release is not loss. Release is creation of space, and into the space that release creates, new possibility flows. Now let us come to the third 7, the cycle of giving. And I have to be honest with you about something before I explain the correct way to practice this. When most people hear about tithing or giving as a financial principle, one of 2 things happens. Either they get excited because they like the idea of a spiritual law that will make them wealthy, or they get skeptical because the whole thing sounds too good to be true, like a prosperity gospel shortcut. Both of those reactions miss the point entirely. The correct practice of the third 7 has nothing to do with making yourself rich through giving. It has everything to do with putting yourself in the correct relationship with money so that you stop being controlled by it. In Genesis 20:18-22, Jacob makes a vow to God after his dream of the ladder reaching to heaven. He says, "Of all that you give me, I will surely give 1/10 to you." Now remember the context. Jacob was not making this vow from a position of wealth. He was making it from a position of complete destitution. He was running for his life. He was sleeping on the ground. He had nothing but a stone for a pillow and a dream. And in that moment of having nothing, he made a commitment to give from whatever he would receive. This is the key that most people miss. Giving from a place of nothing is a declaration. It is a statement to yourself and to the universe that you believe abundance is possible. It rewires the way your mind relates to money. It moves you from a scarcity mindset, where money is something you must grip tightly because there is never enough, to an abundance mindset, where money is something that flows through you, and some of it is meant to flow through you to others. The Talmud in Tractate Tanit says tithe, so that you will become wealthy. In Hebrew it is a wordplay on the word azer, and the rabbis were not speaking metaphorically. They were stating a principle they had observed over centuries. People who give consistently, who make giving the first act of their financial life rather than the last, develop a different relationship with money. They make different decisions. They take different kinds of risks. They attract different kinds of opportunities. Because when you give first, you are demonstrating that you are not ruled by fear. And people who are not ruled by financial fear make better financial decisions in every area of their lives. Here is how you practice the third 7 correctly step by step. You designate 7% of every single amount of money you receive, not 10%. 7. Because this is the 777 rule and the number 7 is intentional. You give 7% before you do anything else. Before you pay rent, before you pay utilities, before you buy groceries. The first 7% goes to tzedakah, which comes from the Hebrew word tzedek, meaning justice or righteousness. And you give it to something real, not to an abstract concept, to a real person or a real community or a real cause that is doing real work in the world. This matters because the act of giving needs to be tangible. It needs to connect you to the reality that your money has the power to change someone's life. When you feel that connection, when you see what your giving does, something opens in you. And that opening is not mystical. It is psychological. It is the feeling of being someone who has enough to give. And once you feel that, you begin to carry yourself differently. You begin to make decisions from a different place. And those decisions begin to produce different results. Now I want to bring all 3 7s together and show you something about how they connect that most people have never seen. Because the real power of the 777 rule is not in any one of the 3 parts. It is in the interaction between them. When you practice the first 7 correctly, you restore your clarity of mind. And that clarity allows you to see your financial life honestly when the second 7 review comes around. When you practice the second 7 correctly and you release the things that are draining you, you create space, both financially and energetically, that makes giving from the third 7 feel natural rather than frightening. And when you practice the third 7 correctly and you give before you do anything else, you reinforce the belief in your own abundance. That makes the focused, intentional work of the 6 days of the first 7 feel purposeful rather than desperate. Each 7 feeds the others. Each 7 makes the others more powerful. This is why Marcus failed for 2 years when he was only partially practicing the rule. And this is why, when he began practicing all 3 in the correct sequence and with the correct intention, everything shifted within 6 months. There is a teaching in Pirkei Avot Mishnah 4:1 that says, "Who is rich? One who is satisfied with his portion." But here is what most people miss about that teaching. You cannot be satisfied with your portion if you do not know what your portion is. You cannot appreciate what you have if you have never honestly looked at it. You cannot release what does not serve you if you have never examined what you are holding. You cannot give generously if you believe you do not have enough. The 777 rule practiced correctly is a system for building the kind of clarity, the kind of honesty, and the kind of courage that makes it possible to finally be satisfied with your portion. Not because you have given up on wanting more, but because you have stopped letting the wanting consume you. I want to tell you one more story before I close, and this one is the most important one. There was an elderly man in our community, a man named Aaron, who had lived through every kind of financial circumstance you can imagine. He had been wealthy and he had been poor. He had built and lost and built again. By the time I knew him, he was in his late 80s and lived simply but with a peace about him that was unmistakable. I asked him once what he believed was the single most important financial lesson of his life. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said this. He said the biggest mistake people make with money is they treat it like it belongs to them. The moment you understand that you are a steward and not an owner, everything changes. Rest becomes possible because you are not afraid of losing your grip. Release becomes possible because you were never holding on to something that was truly yours. Giving becomes natural because you are simply returning to the flow, what was always meant to move through you. The 777 rule is not a trick. It is not a shortcut. It is a way of becoming the kind of person through whom wealth can flow freely, because you have stopped being someone who hoards it, chases it, and fears losing it. The families who have practiced these 3 sevens across generations, the families who rest with intention, who release with honesty, and who give with joy, those families do not just accumulate wealth. They transmit wisdom, and the wisdom is worth more than the wealth, because wisdom generates wealth in every generation, while wealth without wisdom evaporates in one. You have spent these last 30 minutes receiving something that most financial courses, most banking institutions, and most money coaches will never give you, not because they do not want to help you, but because they do not have access to a tradition that has been tested for 3,000 years. Now the question is what you will do with what you have received. So I want you to do 2 things right now before you close this video. First, write in the comments below the words "I will practice the rhythm." When you write that, when your hand commits to those words, something shifts in you. The idea moves from your mind into your will, and your will is where change actually begins. Second, think of one person in your life right now who is working hard but feeling stuck. Someone who feels like they are doing everything right and still cannot seem to get ahead. Share this with them today, not tomorrow, today. Because the right word at the right moment can redirect the entire course of a life. And you might be the person who delivers that word to someone who needs it more than you know. There is a blessing in Hebrew that has been spoken over families for thousands of years. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, melech haolam. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe. The same God who ordained the rhythm of 7, who built rest into the fabric of creation, who commanded release so that no one would be crushed forever by debt, who designed giving as the mechanism through which abundance multiplies. That same God sees exactly where you are right now. He sees the effort you have been making. He sees the struggle you have been carrying. And He is offering you a different rhythm, a rhythm that works not because it is magic, but because it is truth. Rest, release, give, and then rest again, and watch what begins to open in your life.